So this afternoon session, I don't want to make it too long, but I do want to get into collections and what collections are in terms of JavaScript and Ruby, and make sure that you understand like what capabilities you have when you're utilizing any of those data structures. So in terms of a collection, what do you think a collection is used for? In real life, what do we use collections?
Storing things.
Yeah, storing stuff, right? We're storing information. Those could be, you know, buckets of things or the same kinds of things, different kinds of things, right? When we store things, sometimes we need to know like the order in which they're stored. Sometimes we just need to throw it all in a bucket, you know. Sometimes we need to get out, you know, is anybody familiar with the terms LIFO and FIFO, right? So LIFO is last in, first out, and FIFO is first in, first out. So sometimes when you have a collection, you need to get something out that you most recently put in, right? Sometimes you would think of that like a stack of pancakes, right? When you stack a pancake, set of pancakes, you take the most recent one that was put in, out, right? Put on the stack. And then alternatively, if you have like a line of people, you're not going to serve the last person who came in the line, right? You're going to serve the first person who was in the line, which was the one that was there the longest, right? So that was like the last in, first out. Or no, first in, first out. That's FIFO, LIFO. It's utilized mostly in business. But anyway, so all these are dealing with collections, okay? And the way that we deal with collections in JavaScript and Ruby are largely three things until we get into a place where we're starting to dealing with databases, okay? For now, we're going to focus on understanding these three types of, these three types of collections, which if anybody knows Ruby versus JavaScript, you'll see a difference, exactly. Okay, so with JavaScript and Ruby, we have almost the same thing, but not entirely the same exact thing, okay? What might feel confusing now, knowing that everything is basically an object in just about both of these languages, there's particular types of ways that these objects behave, okay? So first, we'll talk about arrays. So an array, as we've known before, right, on both of these occasions, you'll see the syntax look like that. You'll know that that is an array, okay, on both sides. We can create an array just by naming that in a variable. So on JavaScript side, var stuff equals that, right? And then similarly, stuff equals that. We could also say stuff, oops. You can say stuff equals array.new. Okay. Now in this case, there's some arguments that we're putting in here. You don't have to do all this stuff, but this is basically building 10 arrays with 3 i's in it. Okay, that's a little more complicated than you need to know. But if I took out this argument here, this is building an array, 10 arrays. Array new, 10 items in it, actually, I think. Okay. So we can double check that here. We want it to. Okay. When it does that, it's saying, I need an array with 10 spaces in it. Okay. Basically like 10 spaces for items to be in there. And we didn't default write what we wanted to be in there. Arrays can hold anything, including other arrays, right? So in this case, we have here an array of like nil, which is basically like nothingness, okay? So there are methods that we can utilize with the array object class that we can help to manipulate what's in the array, okay? The other important part about arrays is that it's ordered, listed by an index, and that's a 0 ordered index, okay? So we array from 0, array away from 0, okay?
So this array.new 10, that's like saying in line 3, stuff equals like just a bunch of commas, right? Like
Well,
nothing in there.
Technically, there's something called nil, which means nothing, but it's an object that
It just means a space.
has nothingness. Yeah,
Equivalent to null in JavaScript.
pretty much. Nil and null are pretty much like the same thing. Okay, so if I said I want 10 things and I want them all to say like hello in there, okay, then it would have an array. Okay, then it would just build an array with 10 things.
This is the array stuff.
Yes, I renamed it. Okay, so if I wanted to know, for example, what was the first thing in the array, I can say stuff at the 0 place, which right now everything is 0, so I could have been wrong, but that's exactly what it is, right? 0 is going to give you the first element in the array. Alternatively, I could say stuff dot first, which is an array method that will give me the first thing in the array. Same thing, there's last. It'll give me the last thing in the array. So when you're ever in a position where you're dealing with a collection where you don't know how many things are in the collection, you can say, I want the first thing in the collection. I don't care how many things are in it. And then, or the last thing in the collection. Okay, in JavaScript, we would typically do array.length -1, right? We would say like, I need to find whatever the last thing in the array -1, which means give me that actual thing that's at the end of this array, right? Some other things to note about arrays is that it allows duplicates, as you know here, right? We have a bunch of hellos, which are all the same thing. Not really useful for lots of reasons. And it has efficient random access since there is an index. So if we wanted to get like the third thing, we know that we can ask for the third thing, right? Because we know the index is going to give us the ability to go in there and pull something from the middle of that array, okay, by calling it, okay? The arrays, you don't have to have something built into an array when you define it, so these are perfectly fine arrays as we built them here, okay? Array methods, when you're building stuff using arrays, you might or might not want to make sure that the output you get will mutate the state of that actual array. So have all of you heard of the term state before? Nods, yes, no. Okay. So state is basically just like the status at which your objects exist in, right? Like at our current state, we have 8 people in this room, right? So if I did something, some kind of method that was mutable, instead of, if I said something like, let's, fly people out of this room, 3 people, okay? Then if this was a mutable method and only, I said 5 people or 3 people were being flied, 3? Okay, so then there's 5 people left in this room, right? That's mutable, meaning like we are physically having people leave from this room, right? But if I did something where it was like immutable, it would mean that I would basically make a copy of the array and I would return a separate array that has, or I would return something separate from the original array. It wouldn't change the state of the original array. It would give you the result of what would happen if you did this thing, okay? But it wouldn't change the actual original array. Okay, does that make some sense to everyone? So some examples of a, let's see some examples of an array method. that we can utilize here. Yeah. So actually, here's one. So if you wanted to do stuff dot push, is everybody familiar with push? Right. We've utilized that in JavaScript. Okay. Okay. So we just push something to the end of the array. Okay. Now, if we did stuff, that literally put something extra into the array, right? But if we did stuff dot pluck, oh, not pluck. Let's see, what's a good method to do this with? Ah, reverse. Okay, so if we did stuff.reverse here, which means that we're reversing the order that the array is in, and we ask for stuff again, notice that goodbye is still at the end of the array.
And all of this stuff is Ruby and JavaScript.
This particular method is in Ruby, sorry. So I'm focusing on like showing you how like arrays work in Ruby. If there's any glaring differences in JavaScript, I'll note that. Okay.
You use it on the string too.
Reverse.
Yeah.
I believe reverse might be a method that it's like might be an enumerable method. So it means you can use it on things that have like basically like multiple items, or it'd be iterable. Okay. But regardless of this particular method, the point is that it did not change the state of the original array, right? It did something to show you and returned a separate array that that this function was run upon, right? This method was run upon, but it didn't change the state of the original array. Okay. Okay. So this type of data structure, we already talked a little bit about. It's ordered, has index, and it's utilizing square brackets. Okay, that's the syntax you use for an array. And if it's nested, you would have square brackets inside of square brackets. Everything is comma separated inside the array. Okay, it's an ordered list. Everything's fixed location. This is a good way to think about what an array really is, right? Like except for the S here would be like a 0 index. There's things in that 0 index, whether that's a number or a string or another array or an object. It's sitting in that place, and it's pretty set in order. Okay. Talking about that. Oh, a good note to keep in mind when you're utilizing Ruby, if you wanted to push something into an array, you can do .push, but you can also use this what's called a shovel, which are 2 arrows, and that's basically saying you're pushing it into the array.
Is that more common?
You'll see that in Ruby. An object being pushed into an array using a shovel. Okay, so that's what's being seen here. We have an array that's built, and then we're basically shoving the 1 into the array. And then if you ask for the array again, you'll see 1 in there. Okay. I'm not gonna try. Okay, so we talked a little bit about methods that we already have that allow us to kind of access items in the array. We can also use other methods that are like sample, which will just pull a random object, which is useful. Because in JavaScript, we have to use like math.random and math.floor and all that stuff, right? Create a rand object and math.floor and all that. Ruby has some other methods that let you deal with that without having to do too much work. Awesome. Okay. So The next piece after arrays are hashes. And we talked a little bit about hashes by way of like talking a little bit about objects and JavaScript yesterday. So a hash is something that allows you to set key value pairs, okay? So you have an empty hash that you can create. The difference between a hash and an array is that a hash is not going to have ordered information in it. It's going to have information that can be accessed through a unique key. So in a hash, you have a set of keys and then values that are set to those keys, okay? So the example that we have here, right? We have a given user where the key is name and the value is Jonathan. The values can be like different types of objects, so they can be strings or numbers or arrays or even other objects, okay? But they have to be associated with a key name, and it has to be unique, and that would basically function as a variable, pretty much. Question.
Are there any like routine methods Ruby that allow you to test the quality of hashes or arrays? You know, like in JavaScript, you have to add array over that's only value. Is there like a Ruby method that makes it like the dot, like the dot sample or lets you test?
So there are a lot of methods that you can utilize with hashes that will let you access items in your hash, that will add more things to your hash, etc. In terms of comparing two hashes and testing whether or not those two objects have equal value, I'm not sure of the like particular method that you would utilize. I would assume that you can say hash1 dot equal question mark hash2 and assume that they would be evaluating not only the fact that they are both hash objects, but also that the value, the values inside of that hash object are the same. I don't know to what detail it might do that comparison, like saying that both objects have the same types of keys, and then all of those keys are holding the same types of values. I don't know if it would get to that detail, but we can definitely check that out in the Ruby docs for hash. Okay, but for now, when you want to create a hash, all you have to do is use curly braces. One thing that might be a little discerning is the fact that you're using this like curly brace, which you've like from this point to now used as like a block, saying like this is like code block logic stuff that's happening, whereas in this case we're saying this is an object. So hopefully there you'll see clarity between something being defined as a hash object and something being utilized as a block of code.
It can't be on the same line, right? Or...
It can be on the same line. It's readable to have things set like this, where you say, okay, here's all the keys, these are all the values. And then those keys and values are comma separated as well, but it's much more readable to do it this way. So we would prefer that when you're creating a hash object, that you're, unless you're just creating an empty hash object, right? Like we wouldn't want you to like put all that on a separate line. But if you're setting a bunch of keys inside of a hash, that you would list out that those sets of keys, and then being able to read out the values in an organized way. Okay. One of the most useful methods for looking at arrays and hashes and getting information out of them or doing things to them is each. So the each method is utilized both in array and hash, and that's what I had mentioned earlier about enumerables. So there's an enumerable class or an enumerable set of methods that Ruby allows for to be used for anything that is like a collection that you can iterate over. Okay, so each is one of those methods. So it's not just for arrays and not just for hashes. It's for anything you can iterate over. Okay, so when you iterate over an array, you can use array.each And then the new thing that you might not have seen before is do item, okay? So when you say array.each do, you're saying, okay, you're about to iterate over this, and then for each, it's kind of like starting a for in JavaScript, where you're saying each item that you're iterating over, do the following to that item, okay? Item in this case is an argument that you name yourself. It doesn't have to be something that's set previous to this line of code. It's something you usually name in that moment. The only other thing that you'll see in the future is that you might have set things that, even though you name them whatever you want, they're going to be interpreted as these particular things. So I want to note here that hash is taking two arguments. Hash.each is taking two arguments, not just one in this, this process. You need both when you're doing each, the key and the value. Okay, the first item is going to be represented as the key, and then the second argument is going to be set as the value. So
I'm taking notes on every of this. Why is that hash? Why is it compass in brackets?
good question. I actually don't know. It really should be it should be curly braces. So good eye for that. Yeah, these two pieces should be in curly braces. And then you have key and value, and then second key, second value, right? Makes sense to everyone? So the good thing that, yeah, think about this part here, the term item, and then on this side, key and value, as like a placeholder variable. It's not a literal variable that you've defined. It's just a way internally for you to call what it is. Similar to the way that in a for loop you said var I equals this, and then you use I inside of the for loop, right? You're basically just making up what I is. It's still going to use, like, whatever word you name it, it's just going to use that name inside that loop. Okay?
It represents, it's going to represent the elements, not the index.
Yes, this is going to represent each element in the array. So at each item, for each, when you do a loop, for every loop that you make, the item is going to have something happen to it. Okay?
I was just looking up Ruby docs this morning with each, but it was a way to access to bring up the index. It was before the I in the for loop.
Mm-hmm. So
is that not? Is it different each?
Yeah, so there's a different each that you would utilize called each with index, where you can access each index in here. You can always take item and ask for its index as well if you really wanted to inside the each, but it's also useful to utilize each with index if you need to. Like if you really need to like have specific, you don't really need the index number particularly, but if you do, you can use each with index. So for loops are in JavaScript. We don't really have for loops that are utilized in Ruby. Yeah, for is not an iterable that you would utilize in Ruby. You would use each, use map, which you'll learn soon enough, right? Map, which basically takes your array and does a set of functions upon each item in that array, and then returns the result of those operations.
Sorry, one more thing. When you say index within this particular each group, function.
Method.
Are you saying that I thought index was a keyword in Ruby? Am I mistaken? It's an index. Huh? It's an index. No, when you want to use the index.
That can be anything. That can be odd. That can be index.
Well, so here, this is the item. So
Right.
if I'm inside, yes, so if I'm inside, it's the element. So if I'm inside this each loop, okay? If I'm in here and I want to say item.index, I can do that. I can say, hey, item, tell me your index within the array. Or I can say, hey, give me array where the item is like the item's index. Like you can access that information within the loop based on the particular element that's inside the loop at the time. Okay? But in this example, it's not necessary, right? So in this point, we're just saying for each item, do something, and that's it. We don't need, at that point, we're not needing to push the process through by setting an index and incrementing on that index the way you would a for loop. It's already doing that based on its understanding of the array's length. It already knows about the array's length. So it's going to just take each item in that array and do something to that item until there are no other items in that array. Okay.
What would be the best way to set up a for loop?
You wouldn't use a for loop. You would use each. So in Ruby world, welcome to the world of simple each method. Okay, you use it a lot. Eventually, you're going to learn how to utilize map, and that would be how you run how you would run the work that you're doing. There are definitely other methods in Ruby that could simulate if you wanted to do some kind of counter patterns or some kind of incremental stuff that you would need to do. And that's definitely something you would find either in the enumerable set of methods or with specifically in the array methods. But I would challenge you all to like spend some time looking at Ruby docs for methods in the array class and then testing that stuff out in IRB. Okay, but for now, each is really doing a lot of the work that you need to do that you had normally done in JavaScript. Okay.
Every loop in Ruby is going to be based on the array. So like even counters, like if you want to do like a for loop that would skip to and run backwards based on an array. Like you have to make an array.
So anything you want to iterate over.
No, like a for like loop, like a regular for loop, like for var equals var I equals 0, y is less than 20, I plus plus, and or I plus 2. So like you're counting, every
yeah. So you would do dot even or dot odd. So again, there are methods inside array object that you can utilize that would emulate anything you would want to do in a for loop. So I would just really focus on what you can do with each, which is a lot, and then step from there. Cool?
Yeah, just trying to like, so everything's based on arrays.
No, it's not necessarily based on arrays. So it's based on the idea that you can enumerate over things. So whether that is an array object, a hash object, you can either enumerate over strings because each string has a character, right? You can utilize enumerables on string objects because you know that that can be broken out into characters. So all of those things can be iterated over, and that's where enumerable object comes from, or enumerable class of methods that let you loop and iterate over things. Okay? Yeah, there's lots of different ways to iterate over things. Okay, so loops are plentiful in Ruby. Okay, so welcome to the world of Ruby. Okay, iterate over hash, we already talked about this, key value. Okay, now, are we laughing at dry? Oh. So yeah, so the idea when you are working on dev work, you want to make sure that your code is dry. Dry means don't repeat yourself, okay? So it's useful when you start to write everything out, you know, hard code everything as you will, and then that's going to allow you to see patterns, okay? If I start writing the same word 5 times, I know that, you know what, maybe I can just make this one word at a time, right? Or maybe I can, you know, extrapolate this out into its own thing. Then I only have to call that once instead of rewriting all the same stuff, okay? So as you start looking at the work that you're doing, the logic that you are creating shouldn't have to be something that you are repeatedly writing out. It should be something that you can just call once or that you can reference multiple times, but from one place, okay? So groups program logic together so you don't have to repeat yourself, okay? So again, here, we already talked about defining. So when you define a method, you use def end, and then you call it by actually just invoking that variable name or the method name, okay? Oh, that's extra.
That's why I was like,
I mean, I feel like a lot of the Roman numerals that I've seen, I've looked at a lot of like Roman numeral challenges. A lot of people are like, oh, you know, there's a lot of what you call as a developer like magic numbers that are like really particular. And if you don't think of them as being given meaning, like they have particular meaning in that context, but if you extrapolate that meaning and make it so that if there's any other given number, then it could be replaced and evaluated at that point, it makes your code a lot more nimble, because then maybe you realize I could use this pattern in another place, or I can use this method in another place, okay? The more that you think about how this could be used in more settings, the better your code is going to end up, okay? The last thing that I wanted to check in about, because we talked about hashes. We didn't talk a little bit about how you would access stuff in a hash, so I'm going to do that real quick. So if I say more stuff, oh, I almost did JavaScript, right? Did y'all see that? More stuff equals hash, so I can do that, or I can do more stuff equals hash.new, okay? Same thing. Additionally, if I say more stuff and I want to add something to this, I can use 2 different kinds of notation. I can say name and then equals 0. Okay, so now if I say more stuff, it's going to hold that information. So I have name here, and that value is Kara. Okay, alternatively, if I say more stuff dot age equals 34. Ooh. Oh, so if I said more stuff dot name, though, if I did that, wouldn't it be able to? Dot notation works in JavaScript and not in Ruby. Ah. Okay. That's to be an object notation. Oh, that's different. Okay, never mind. That's extra. So in JavaScript, instead of me getting this error, I would actually get the value. Okay. I don't have any windows open to show you, but that is called dot notation. Okay. So instead of me asking for the information by searching for, so I'm saying more stuff at the, normally if this was an array, I would ask for more stuff at the 0 place, right? But in a hash, there is no 0 place because a hash is not ordered, okay, by index. The stuff that you access is accessible by its unique key. So instead of asking for something by its number, you would ask for it by its name. Okay.
So how do you add?
So right now, this object has one unique key named name. Okay. I would not be able to make another key in here. Exactly. So see, it replaced me because it could only have one key name. Okay, now if I had more stuff where it was like name 2, okay, then I can be there. Make sense to everybody? Keys have to be unique. Okay, but values can be like, I could say names. Okay, so here I have something called names, and the value is a full array of all the names, if I wanted to do it in that way.
If you're creating like a profile, like for name or birthday.
Right, because what if I wanted name and birthday and like all the friends and all that, like that information doesn't necessarily need to come in a particular order, right? We just need to have all the information named, like set up a particular way in terms of like, I need to make sure I have people's names and their birthdays and like their hometown, or sometimes maybe they don't have a hometown, or sometimes they don't have a current address or a current, I don't know, phone number, right? So some of that information can be left out, whereas an array, if I wanted all that information, it maybe was either incomplete, or I would have to remember, okay, does birthday come before name or after name? Or at what point did I add somebody's address in the array, right? I wouldn't be able to just ask for a birthday or ask for the address. I would say, okay, the Kara profile array at 47, like probably that might be my address. Okay, so that's where you would try and see, where you would find that it would be difficult to utilize an array over a hash, or a hash over an array. That makes sense to everybody? Cool. All right. The last kind of data set, the last kind of collection that you could utilize. You're not going to use it for the purposes of this course or this program, but it's important for you to understand that it exists, and know that there are other data collections that exist, or collection type data types that exist, and it's called set. A set is basically like a mixture. It's like a baby between the hash and array. Okay, so a set requires the a set looks like an array, but it requires unique fields. Okay, so it has to have unique items in that array. So I can't, when I do like if I did last stuff here, set.new, right, and where everything is hello. Well, besides the uninitialized constant. If I wanted to do this, this would not work in a set, okay? Because I can't have the same stuff in a set. Everything in a set has to be unique, okay? It does allow for indexing, but it doesn't allow for any duplicates, okay? So outside of that, just know that you're mostly going to be working with arrays and hashes. In JavaScript, hashes are deemed as objects. You can utilize objects and create them literally, as we did above here. That would be in JavaScript what's called an object literal. You can also create objects that are set as constructors. So you would initialize a new thing that you create and then set up the properties that need to be saved for that object. Okay. Awesome. See if I missed anything else. I don't think I did. All the documentation for all the stuff that I just talked about are in, is everybody familiar with this site? You know, Ruby docs. This explains to you like how to make one, how to make arrays, how to utilize all these methods. So here, if you ever see this notation, hash name, that is telling you that it is a method, okay? Okay, a type of method, okay? And then I mentioned the other set, it's called a mixin, enumerable. And these are a set of methods that you can utilize on any collection class. So that can involve arrays or hashes or sometimes strings that can be broken down into like character collections. Okay, cool. All right, that is all for now.